this is the Provoked Prawn, and if you've got yourself a Corsair iCue Link cooler, you can upgrade it with a number of different pump caps. So I wanted to talk to you about these, show them off, and then talk about the differences. I'm going to do some thermal testing a little later on to show you what difference they can make. Now, I've done this in the Corsair 3500X, along with Corsair's RX fans, but the upgrade logic for this will work across all the Corsair iCue Link coolers. In this build, for example, I'm using the Titan 360 RGB, which is a new, affordable and accessible iCue Link cooler, but the upgrade logic will also work with the other devices. The good thing about iCue Link is it's very flexible, and the little controller allows you to plug in 24 different devices, 12 on either side. And that includes fans, the pump cap display, the radiator, the pump itself, and more. So it's very customizable. This Titan RGB is also awesome. I'm going to do a separate video on it and talk about why it's good, interesting, and easy to work with, including the fact, for example, simple things like the fact that the bracketing is already pre-installed with the standoff screws. You will note, though, that there are connections on the pump head for USB-C and for the iCue Link connectivity. Now, as standard, the Titan cooler comes with a little removable pump cap which has the Corsair logo on it and is essentially designed to let the RGB shine through. You will notice there is a minor highlight here in that it's slightly magnetic and can be revolved on top of the pump, which means that if you want to put the pump at a different angle, in a different position, you can easily turn the logo around so that it doesn't look weird, which is a nice small change to the design, which means that you can easily customize it for your system and your build, which is pretty nice. However, you can pay extra and you can upgrade with different options. So you have the VRM fan, the pump cap, and the LCD screen. Now, the LCD screen's been around for a while, but I'll get to it in a second. The VRM fan is, for me, the more interesting one, although it really does depend on what you want to do to your system. This is adding in an additional fan to your setup with a little fan that sits on top of the pump. And as you see, it has multiple holes around the edge of it. The idea being here that it will cool not only the CPU, but the surrounding environment on the motherboard and parts of it. Now, the installation of these is really straightforward. I'm making it look difficult here, but if you're doing it and your pump's already installed on the motherboard, it's a lot easier. Essentially, what you need to do is to pop the top cap off, so the standard cap that comes included, and it is held in place with a couple of brackets at the top and bottom, and it does require a little bit of effort to get off, but it's much easier when it is installed in the system. For the VRM fan, you'll notice there's some pins in there which will need to be lined up with the copper contacts on the pump itself so that the fan can be spun up and communicate with iCue Link. There's also the pump cap, which is a more RGB affair, so this one's more aesthetic than a useful thing, potentially. It's all about looks here. And this allows the RGB lighting to shine through. This is more simple installation because it doesn't have any contact on there, so you don't need to worry about any pins. What you will notice is the design of it allows for more RGB light bleed to come through, and from my clips you'll see that it is very bright. So this is quite a bit brighter. In fact, so is the VRM fan. I just found the RGB from these is actually more overpowering than lighting from the fans themselves, which is pretty interesting, I thought. Installation is really straightforward though. It just pops on and then clicks into place. Now, the LCD screen is a little more complicated because you'll see once you get this out of the box, and I have done a separate guide on this, that it also has some additional wires. So the other two don't, but this one does, and that's because it's a bit more complicated. So it has an additional USB-C cable and a USB splitter included in the box, and that's because you're going to need the USB connection from the display and the USB connection from the controller as well, so that both can be controlled and accessed via Corsair's iCue software and adjusted. Like the VRM fan, the display also comes with those pins included, so it needs to be lined up with that and then connected into place, and then that will allow you to do all sorts of interesting things, including showing off GIFs, temperature readouts, and more. I actually think this is probably the most useful. I really like having a display on my cooler, and you'll see why in a second. But it does mean that you have an additional cable to worry about. Now, on the Titan cooler, that USB-C cable plugs into the pump itself and then needs to be run to the motherboard. But on the older coolers, for example, the original iCue Link H150i RGB, which used the QX fans, and had a more detailed setup. The USB connection from that will plug into the radiator instead. So actually all the cabling on this cooler ran through the tubes and there was basically nothing on the pump head itself. Instead, the iCue Link cables were on the radiator, and so the USB connection for the display also needed to be plugged into the radiator. So if you had the LCD screen upgrade kit, or if you get it, if you have that style of cooler, note that you have to plug the USB-C connection into the rad and then plug that into the motherboard. So 2 connections need to go to the motherboard in this instance, so it's a little bit more complicated than either the standard pump or the other upgrade options. You need to plug the USB cables into the splitter or into your motherboard directly. You need to make sure that you've got both connections plugged in, basically. And if you're having issues, this is why, because you've forgotten to do this. You usually have 2 USB connections in the bottom middle of your motherboard. So just a quick note about that. So with those connected up, you can then control these displays in Corsair's iCue, and you can do all sorts of things, including just showing off GIFs or using it for temperature readouts. Now, I like the temperature readouts myself. You can now do dual readouts, so you can have your CPU and GPU temperatures, for example, on the display at the same time, which means at a glance, you can look and see what your current temperatures are. This is useful for me during benchmarking, but it's also useful during gaming. If, for example, you find there's a problem with your system, or you notice that one of the things is running too hot, like in the high 90s, for example, you've got a really easy indicator that there's a problem there, so it's a nice upgrade. With your system powered off, it's really easy to swap these caps out for these different upgrade modules, and you can easily pull them off. I showed you that it was pretty difficult when it's not inside there, but when it's clamped to the motherboard with the standoff screws, it's really easy to just pop those off and install them. Obviously, if you don't have to worry about the USB-C cable for the display, it's much easier with these other ones. The groove module is particularly bright, as you can see here. It's blowing out the camera a little bit compared to the fans, which seem a little bit darker. And obviously you can adjust the brightness within Corsair's iCue software. Now, for the VRM Fan one, I wanted to do some tests to see how much difference this would make, because obviously this is more than just an aesthetic change, although it does look pretty cool. And it is an additional fan in the system, so if you're looking to have just extra fans and have looked for an excuse, then here's how you can do it. So for testing purposes, I've run Cinebench 2024 and OCCT on this system. This is in the Corsair 3500X with 6 intake fans and 4 exhaust fans. So the intake fans on the radiator, intake fans on the bottom of the case, and 4 exhaust fans at the top. Start off with Cinebench and have a look at the temperatures for this. Now we're going to look at the VRM temperatures surrounding the CPU and obviously the CPU itself as well, see if it makes any difference. So this is what the temperature's got to. Obviously ignore the 127 degrees readouts because that is just an error likely with the sensors, but it happened in both instances, and you can get an idea of the temperatures. So if you want to, you can pause, and in a second I'll show you the temps side by side for the comparison. But I also had a look at the CPU temperatures to see if that made any difference. I ran OCCT as well, which did an hour-long stress test on the CPU, putting it under load to see what the performance was like there. The idea being to get 2 different tests to see what the temperatures were like and then be able to compare them side by side in a second. So basically getting a baseline here with the standard pump cap and then swapping out for the VRM fan, as you can see here, and running exactly the same tests again. This is actually the next day though, so it's not like the PC is still hot from the previous tests. We did it a day later. And then I ran these tests again, starting with Cinebench and then going to OCCT, so I can have a look at this. Now, obviously, it's only a small fan, and it's not blowing directly onto the CPU because of the way it's designed, as you will have seen, so there'll be some spillage of the cooling around the edges here. And then I wanted to be able to just have a look at this and how it got on and see if there was a big difference in the performance. I didn't notice a big audible performance difference, so it didn't get a lot louder from having that little fan, which is definitely a bonus. But what you'll see here is it doesn't actually look like there's a great big difference in the overall temps here. So if I put the 2 lots of temps side by side, and maybe you want to pause and see, if you look on the right hand side, you can see the maximum readout there of what the temperatures would be. So you have the maximum possible temperatures that we got up to, and you'll see there's not much difference in it. Now the CPU did actually get a couple of degrees cooler, so there might be some performance increases, but it's marginal, I think, across the board for the most part. It didn't make a great big deal of difference. There was perhaps a couple of degrees difference in surrounding VRMs. It really was marginal, though, as you can see from the data. Now, you have to take these sorts of things with a pinch of salt, because obviously the room temperature, the ambient temperature, the fan setup and other things could have an influence on it, so your experience may vary. But it's not a super expensive upgrade to the system, and it is a pretty nifty one. It's quite cool to have a little fan on there. It looks quite nice. Like I said, I personally prefer the display. It's really going to be up to you, but hopefully you found this video a useful insight. Check out the links in the description to find out more. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos. You might well find them interesting or useful. And most importantly, have a great life.